March is National Nutrition Month. Each year, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics observes National Nutrition Month in March. And each year they pick a different theme. And the theme this year is Celebrate a World of Flavors, which embraces different global cultures and cuisines. And it's an opportunity to perhaps try a new ingredient or a new flavor, a new recipe, or revisit maybe a favorite family or ethnic recipe that you haven't had in a while. So if you want to learn more about National Nutrition Month, you can go to their website, either eatright.org, or you can go to nationalnutritionmonth.org. It'll take you directly to that National Nutrition Month page. If you want more resources related to this theme, they do have some fun games as well, like crossword puzzles and word searches and so forth related to the theme. So something a little extra, a little fun. I would encourage you to celebrate a world of flavors and maybe try a new recipe or revisit a recipe this month that you haven't had in the past or had for a while. Tonight, we will be talking about the Dietary Guidelines for Americans, titled this, What's New in Nutrition? And they're still fairly new. So the Dietary Guidelines, if you're not familiar with them, are published every 5 years by the USDA and the Department of Health and Human Services. And every 5 years, an external advisory committee comes together to review the most recent research and evidence related to nutrition, and they update these guidelines. This year, the 2025 edition, so the current edition is the 9th edition, and the title of this edition is Make Every Bite Count. So that's a little bit of a overarching theme. And for the first time, this edition of the guidelines is structured by age range. So there's there's the guidelines as a whole in general that are relevant to each stage of life, but then there's a chapter for infants and toddlers and a chapter for children and adolescents, adults, older adults. So a little bit more specific guidance based on stage of life. And these guidances are designed to promote health and prevent disease. So I always share that if you or a loved one has been diagnosed with a condition, something like diabetes, or you have a food allergy or intolerance, you may need more specific guidance that goes beyond these guidelines. These guidelines are foundational. They can be built upon, but they're designed for the average adult to promote health and prevent disease. And you can access them yourself online. I'm actually going to hop over to the website just to show you. If you're interested, you can access these guidelines online to take a look through them. It is a pretty long document. So tonight I'll be just sharing the highlights. And to start, I do want to share a little bit of an introductory, I'll introduce them with this introductory video. So this is a short video with a lot packed into it. Don't panic because we'll go into this in more detail. I know they do try to cram a lot into this short video, so we'll unpack it together. So our dietary guidelines for Americans have 4 overarching guidelines. This is the roadmap that's at the beginning of that document. And the first one is to follow a healthy dietary pattern at every life stage. So these guidelines apply to everyone from young children up through older adults. And the second is to customize and enjoy your food and beverage choices to reflect personal preferences, cultural traditions, and budgetary considerations. I am really happy to see this one included and even highlighted. Oftentimes we don't think about enjoying our food, especially when it's healthy food. But we eat for a variety of reasons. We eat for nourishment. But food is also enjoyable. So, customizing your choices, staying within this framework to meet your nutrient needs, but customizing it to include food and beverages that you enjoy, that reflect your personal preferences, your culture, and also your budgetary considerations. So there are, lower cost options, and then if you have more bandwidth within your budget, there's, higher cost things you could include as well, but lots of room for customization. The third guideline is to focus on meeting your food group needs with nutrient-dense foods and beverages to stay within calorie limits. So this term nutrient-dense comes up quite a bit. And basically what it means is foods that have a lot of nutrients relative to their calorie content. And we'll unpack that a little bit more in a moment. And then the fourth guideline is to limit foods and beverages that are higher in added sugars, saturated fat, and sodium, and to limit alcoholic beverages, because we know that having a diet that is too high in any of those things increases risk for chronic disease. Hopefully my plate looks familiar. It is an icon that was created by the USDA, and it's been around for over 10 years now. And while the guidelines, the dietary guidelines, explain what to eat for optimal health, my plate is an icon, a simple image that illustrates how to achieve the guidelines. So if you think about those overarching recommendations, follow a healthy dietary pattern at every life stage. My plate is for everyone. Once a child starts to eat, solid foods, my plate is the guidance that's recommended all the way through adulthood. And then you customize and enjoy your food and beverage choices within my plate. And your plate is not always going to look like a plate. So I like to emphasize that as long as these major food groups are represented, whether it's a mixed dish like a casserole, a soup, a stew, a skillet meal, as long as these major food groups are represented at your meal times throughout the course of the day, you're on the right track. And, you might enjoy fruits and vegetables that are different from someone else. You might enjoy, items that are part of different cultural or ethnic cuisines, and someone else might have other preferences. Lots of room for customization here. But the key is to focus on meeting your food group needs from these major food groups that are represented in my plate. Your fruits and vegetables, half the plate being fruits and vegetables. Those are nutrient-dense foods. They have a lot of nutrients relative to the calories they contain. And fresh, frozen, canned, dried, they all count. You can eat a variety of things based on what's in season, what's within your budget. Focusing on trying to make half that plate fruits and vegetables, including grains with an emphasis on whole grains. Again, those whole grains are nutrient-dense foods. They have a lot of nutrients relative to their calories. Whereas your refined grains would have, less nutrients. They would be more energy dense. But your grains are, especially whole grains, can be a nutrient dense food. Protein with an emphasis on lean proteins, and then dairy or dairy alternatives to provide nutrients like calcium and vitamin D. So you can use My Plate at any stage of life, customize it as you wish, and include these major food groups to get the nutrients you need, staying within your calorie limits, and then limit foods and beverages that are high in added sugar, saturated fat, and sodium. And there's a image that this is a screenshot directly from those guidelines that kind of provides a rationale for those recommendations to focus on those nutrient dense foods and limit the added sugar, saturated fat, and sodium. So it's estimated that we need to obtain about 85% of our calories or energy from these major food groups to meet our energy needs and stay within our calorie needs. That only leaves about 15% of our calories or energy needs to be coming from other sources like oils and fats or sugars, sugary beverages, for example, other foods, the things that aren't part of My Plate. And what happens if this ratio is off is that, we're either over consuming calories, which can lead to weight gain, or we're not getting enough nutrients. So you may be getting enough calories, but you may have some nutrient gaps because they're not coming from those nutrient dense foods. And we all have room to improve. So another screenshot that comes directly from those guidelines, only about a quarter of us currently are getting enough fruits and vegetables. So put another way, about 75% of us have diets that are low in fruits, vegetables, and dairy, while about 2/3 of us are getting more than enough added sugar. About 3/4 of us are exceeding the recommended limit for saturated fat, and about 90% of us are exceeding the recommended limit for sodium. There's another image within the guidelines, and I think it came up in that video. It kind of looked more like a report card. There's actually a healthy eating score that they sort by age group, and the highest scores are the bookends. So young children and older adults tend to have the highest healthy eating scores. But even so, the highest scorers are only in that 60 to 70% range. And when you think of that like a report card, a C or a D just doesn't cut it. So we all have room to improve in this regard, focusing on those nutrient dense foods, trying to get more fruits, vegetables, whole grains, lean protein, low-fat dairy or dairy alternatives, and then limiting the added sugar, saturated fat, and sodium. So I'm going to look now, I'm going to break down those things that we're encouraged to limit in a little bit more detail, starting with the sodium. So the recommended limit for sodium is no more than 2,300 milligrams, which is a teaspoon a day for individuals 50 or younger, no more than 1,500 milligrams a day for individuals who are at higher risk for heart disease. That includes individuals over 50, African Americans, and those with a condition that can increase your risk for heart disease, like high blood pressure, diabetes, or kidney disease. And the average American consumes approximately 3,400 milligrams of sodium a day. So most of us are well exceeding this limit. And the salt shaker is actually not to blame in most cases. Where do you think most of our sodium intake is coming from? You can open the chat box and share if you have some ideas. What type of foods are high in sodium? I see bread. So bread is on the list. But yes, processed foods, snacks, for the most part, it's packaged and processed foods, foods with preservatives. Packaged, processed, and restaurant foods tend to be where we get most of our sodium. So things like pizza, whether it's takeout or frozen pizza, poultry, again, it might be frozen chicken, it might be takeout or restaurant chicken, soups. I see soup. Someone typed in soup. Yes, so our canned soups are high in sodium. Canned pastas, snack foods. Someone got that one. Things like potato chips and pretzels and so forth. Breads and rolls. Someone guessed that as well. Our lunch meats and things like sandwiches and cheese and meat dishes. So those are the top sources of sodium. So if you're looking to try to reduce your sodium consumption, one of the best things you can do is try to limit the packaged and processed food or fast food. So maybe making a soup at home rather than buying the can of soup, or just making a meal at home instead of getting the fast food or the frozen meal. Those are some suggestions for limiting your sodium. And you can also use the nutrition label as a tool if you are trying to look for foods that are lower in sodium. You have to be careful, sometimes our labels can be tricky or misleading in different regards. One of the terms to watch out for here is reduced sodium. When I see that, I always think, reduced from what? Reduced sodium, it may be reduced, but if it's a soup, for example, reduced sodium may not necessarily mean low sodium. It's a step in the right direction, but making your own would still be a better choice. So you could use the nutrition label to look at the sodium content, and you can actually use the percent daily value in the right-hand column for this. A general rule of thumb is that if something is 5% or less, it's considered low in that nutrient. And if the daily value is 20% or more, it's considered high in that nutrient. So if you're looking at a can of pasta or soup and the percent daily value is 40 or 50, it's probably not the best choice. Can look for something that's lower in sodium. And things like your canned vegetables, for example, or canned beans, you can sometimes find no added salt varieties. If those are available, those are a good option. But for items like vegetables or beans, oftentimes you can rinse them off before using, and that does that will go a long way in regard to getting rid of some of the salt that's added for preservation purposes. So this tool, the nutrition label, can be a useful tool if you're looking at sodium in an item. It can also be a useful tool if you're looking for the fat content in an item, and specifically the type of fat that's in a given item. So on the label, the total fat will be listed, and then under that, the saturated fat will also be listed. Sometimes other types of fats are listed, sometimes not, but the total fat and the saturated fat are always there. And if you recall, it's the saturated fat that we are recommended we limit. So we do need some fat in our diet. Not all fat is bad, but the type and the amount do matter. in general, your saturated fats are coming from animal products. So your animal fat, your milk, your milk fat, butter, cheese, and so forth is going to contain saturated fat. And in general, those are solid at room temperature. So a rule of thumb is if you're looking for to reduce your saturated fat, try to look for the plant-based items, the ones that are liquid at room temperature. Your unsaturated fats are going to be found in things like your oils, avocado, nuts, seeds. It is in fish. So fish, even though they are an animal product, are more oily and they do contain unsaturated fats. So if you're able to choose an unsaturated fat or a plant-based fat or oil over a saturated fat, that would be a better choice. The guidelines recommend limiting saturated fat to no more than 10% of your total calories a day. So if you're interested in trying to find an exact, amount in grams to limit, there's a little bit of math involved, but it can be done. If you estimate your daily calorie needs, you use a tool such as one available on My Plate. You could estimate your daily calorie needs, and then 10% of those, no more than 10% should be coming from saturated fat. But in general, if you choose unsaturated fats versus saturated, for example, if you're cooking, on the stovetop, you're making a skillet meal, if you could use oil instead of butter, that would be a switch you could make. And it's not, recommending that we go vegetarian or cut out those animal fats entirely, but can you choose leaner cuts of meat that are lower in fat to try to limit the saturated fat intake? So those are some ways to try to limit the saturated fat and still get the healthy types of fat that our bodies need. Then the final recommendation in terms of things to limit is added sugar. And again, the nutrition fact label can be a useful tool here. There is now a line under total sugars that tells us how much added sugar is in any given product. And this is sugar that has been added. So it's not what's naturally occurring. Something like orange juice, if it's 100% juice, would have 0 grams of added sugar. All the sugar in that beverage would be coming from the oranges. But something like fruit punch would have a lot of added sugar because it's water and sugar to make it taste sweet. So it's added sugar that were recommended to limit. And the American Heart Association, so again here, the Dietary Guidelines recommend limiting added sugar to no more than 10% of your daily calories. So there's a little bit of math involved. You could do the math and figure it out based on your estimated needs. But the American Heart Association has a more concrete recommendation that I like, which is trying to limit your added sugar to no more than 9 teaspoons a day, which is 36 grams for men, or 6 teaspoons a day, 25 grams per women. And that is to help prevent chronic disease such as heart disease. And top sources of added sugar in our diet are beverages. Those tend to hold a big portion of the pie, so to speak, in regard to added sugars, things like sodas and sweet tea and energy drinks, coffee drinks, and so forth. But sugar can be, it can be in a lot of things: breakfast cereals, yogurt, flavored yogurt, for example. So it might be worth checking on some products. I do see the question: do sugar substitutes count as sugar in the nutrition facts? They do not. No. So So sugar alcohols, if something ends in OL, it's typically a sugar alcohol. And that is a product that is often used in sugar-free products to make them taste sweet. So that would not be, it's not sugar. And then other sugar alternatives like, stevia or Splenda, those would also be, they're sugar alternatives. So no, they're not added sugar. Good questions. So kind of pulling this all together, what we're really trying to do here is shift from less nutritious foods to more nutrient dense foods, making small shifts in your diet to try to reduce the sodium, the saturated fat, the added sugar, and get more nutrients. So a few simple shifts listed here are shifting from whole milk to low-fat milk, shifting from soda to water, maybe infused or seltzer water, shifting from a cream-based pasta dish or a soup to pasta or soup that's tomato-based. You get the less saturated fat and more vegetables that way. What are some other shifts, perhaps, that come to mind if you're thinking about trying to shift away from the saturated fat, the added sugar, and the sodium to more nutritious foods? If you have ideas, you can share those in the chat. And I'll also share there's comments are already coming in, from sour cream to plain yogurt. That's a great example to cut back on the saturated fat and get more nutrients there. Snack alternatives like apples. So shifting away from the snack foods that are higher in fat, sugar, salt, to eating more fruits and vegetables. So anytime you have a snack, that could be like considered like a mini meal. And if you can include a fruit or vegetable or a whole grain in each snack that you have, that's great. Another example here that kind of has a lot of little examples embedded in it is a burrito bowl makeover. And this comes from the Dietary Guidelines as an example. So on the left is a typical burrito bowl, and then on the right is their made over version. So the one on the left has 1.5 cups of white rice. One shift that they made was making it brown rice. So you get the whole grain there, adding lettuce and adding grilled vegetables. So we're adding more vegetables, getting the added color as well as the nutrients from that. Using reduced sodium black beans in the one on the right. The one on the left, the traditional one, has chicken cooked in sauce, where the one on the right has grilled chicken with spice rub. So less fat and sodium there. The chicken is flavored with spices rather than a sauce. And oftentimes, you can use spices to add flavor, and that's a great way to help cut back on sodium if you're doing your own cooking versus buying the packaged or processed items. We also have, in the made over burrito bowl, we have sliced avocado and fresh salsa. So again, more color, more flavor, as well as more nutrients from that. Those replace the sour cream. So we have less saturated fat, reduced fat cheese instead of normal cheese or traditional cheese, and then sweet tea versus unsweet tea. And altogether, all these changes save about 400 calories. So lots of little changes or shifts embedded in this example. So if you have additional ideas or suggestions, please feel free to keep sharing those. I do see the question, are there any websites that can help you calculate things when you're meal planning? Yeah, there are some websites that will include the nutrition facts of items or have a breakdown. So it'll share, the nutrient breakdown per serving. So, off the top of my head, you could go to My Plate Kitchen. So myplate.gov that I shared earlier, they do have a tab full of recipes. And those would have the nutrient breakdown. Celebrate Your Plate is one that comes from Ohio SNAP Ed program. And I see some examples that you all are sharing too. So, using your Fitbit, Eating Well. Eating Well magazine is also a good one. I'm familiar with that. So, if you're looking for websites online, I would say try to look for ones that include the nutrient breakdown, or just start to pay attention to that and see whether it's there. Because a lot of them do, but if you're not in the habit of looking for it, you may not have ever noticed, or you may start to notice that some of the individual blogs, for example, may not have that. Excuse me. But excuse me. But oftentimes it is there with some of the bigger organizations. So great question. Can please feel free to keep sharing resources and ideas and pose your questions. As always, you're welcome to reach out to me if you have additional questions later on. And one additional thing that I did want to share while I have your attention tonight is you are welcome to sign up for the OSU Extension Spring into Wellness email challenge, which will start in April, which is right around the corner. We do this twice a year, and it's completely free to participate. Everyone who signs up will get 2 email messages each week that just have different tips and ideas and encouragement to help you stay healthy through the season. So if you're interested in joining me for that, you are welcome to sign up, and it'll start in just a couple weeks.
Thank you very much. I learned a lot. I wanted to ask, is there anything that you would point to on the Brigham County Extension Office? Any kind of lists? Because one thing people love is, tell me exactly what to do, what to eat, that kind of thing. Is there anything on the Extension site that lists, these are good foods, these are sodium high foods, anything like that?
So what I shared tonight, is basically what I teach. I don't have, as a dietitian, I do try to steer away from being overly prescriptive, which I know some people would prefer. But the challenge with that is when you're overly prescriptive, yes, you have this nice little, list of things to eat. But if it doesn't fit your lifestyle, it doesn't fit your preferences, you're not going to stick with it over the long haul. So I would rather, work with you to find, things that you enjoy within this template, rather than giving you a list of, what to go out and do for the month or the week or whatever it may be. So My Plate truly is the template. There are lots of recipes out there. Again, on My Plate Kitchen and Celebrate Your Plate, those are my 2 go-to resources. And if you want more resources or suggestions, then don't hesitate to reach out.